Look, I'm not going to pretend I didn't see it coming. When you spend 28 years watching your parents treat your older brother like he's the second coming while treating you like a participation trophy they forgot to throw away, you develop a certain radar for disappointment. But even I wasn't prepared for the phone call that came on my 28th birthday. Drop a comment and let me know, what is the most ridiculous excuse a family member has ever given you for playing favorites? I'm reading every single one. I was sitting in my basement apartment in Asheville, the kind of place that smells like wet concrete no matter how many candles you burn. I was eating cold takeout after a 12-hour shift, sketching drainage plans on a napkin because my brain never really turns off. My phone buzzed. Mom. I remember smiling. I thought maybe this year is different. I just won the Regional Eco Design Award. Maybe she saw it. Maybe she cared. Rhea, honey, she said. Her voice had that specific pitch, part kindergarten teacher, part hostage negotiator. It's the tone she uses right before she tells me something I'm supposed to accept without question. Your father and I have news. I have news too, I said, trying to inject some excitement into the damp air of my living room. I won the Greenscape Award. It's actually a huge deal in the industry. Silence. Then a polite cough. That's nice, dear. But listen. We've been talking, and we've decided to help Hunter with a down payment on a house. A legacy property. Something that really establishes the family name. I waited for the rest. There had to be more. Okay, I said slowly. That's great for Hunter. We're giving him $200,000. I nearly dropped my phone into my noodles. $200,000. That was more than I'd make in 4 years. 200,000? Mom, you told me last week you couldn't help me with my car repairs because money was tight. This is different, Rhea. My father's voice cut in from the background. Hunter needs a foundation. He's building a future. A family. I'm building a future, I said, my voice tight. I'm building a career. I'm building a reputation. It's not the same, he said, and I could hear the dismissal in his tone, heavy and familiar. Hunter needs to establish the family name. You'll just get married anyway. A husband will take care of all that for you. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to the static. It wasn't just an insult. It was an erasure. My entire career, my passion, my years of study, all of it reduced to a waiting room for a husband. I hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I just sat there in the silence of my basement, looking at the water stains on the ceiling. And in that silence, something clicked. For years, I'd been addicted to crumbs. That's what it was. It wasn't love. It was intermittent reinforcement. You know how a slot machine works? It doesn't pay out every time. It pays out just often enough to keep you pulling the lever. That was my relationship with my parents. Every now and then, they'd give me a smile, a good job, a moment of attention, and I'd feed on that for months. I'd convince myself that if I just worked harder, if I just achieved more, the payout would finally come. I looked at the art wall in my mind, the dusty corner of the basement where they let me tape up my drawings as a kid, while Hunter's participation trophies cluttered the mantel upstairs. I realized I'd been living in that basement my whole life, waiting for an invitation upstairs that was never going to come. And then I saw the gendered truth of it. They funded Hunter because he was the heir. They ignored me because I was the asset to be transferred. I wasn't a person to them. I was a liability until I became someone else's problem. I looked at my bank account. The savings I'd been scraping together for a family vacation contribution. $5,000. I opened a new tab. High-yield savings account. I transferred every cent. My phone buzzed again. A text from Hunter. Heard the news. Drinks on you next week. I didn't reply. I didn't block them. Blocking is dramatic. Blocking is a reaction. I just stopped. I stopped initiating. I stopped updating. I stopped trying to prove I existed. I let the silence fill the room, and for the first time in 28 years, it didn't feel lonely. It felt like peace. It felt like the first brick in a wall I was going to build around myself. A wall they couldn't climb. I slept better that night than I had in years. No tears. No guilt. Just the quiet, steady rhythm of a decision made. I was done being the daughter they settled for. I was going to be the architect they couldn't afford. For 6 months, I was a ghost in my own family. I didn't block them. I didn't mute them. I just watched. It was like observing a reality show I used to star in but had been written out of. My mother's Facebook feed became a shrine to Hunter's new life. So proud of our boy closing on his dream home, she posted, captioned under a photo of a beige cookie-cutter McMansion in a subdivision where the trees looked like they were made of plastic. The house was massive, gaudy, and soulless. It was everything they valued. Big, loud, and expensive. Hunter stood in the driveway, holding a giant novelty key, grinning like he'd won a race he didn't run. While they were celebrating square footage, I was hunting for dirt. I found a listing at 2 in the morning. 10 acres in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The price was suspiciously low, $85,000. In this market, that meant something was wrong with it. I drove out there the next day before the sun even hit the peaks. It was a mess. It was steep, choked with rhododendron and kudzu, and inaccessible by anything without four-wheel drive. The real estate agent, a guy in a suit who clearly didn't want to get his shoes muddy, apologized before we even got out of the car. "It's unbuildable," he said. "The grade is too steep for a standard foundation. That's why it sat on the market for 2 years." But he didn't see what I saw. He saw a problem. I saw a contour map. My entire career as an eco-landscape architect was built on working with the land, not forcing it into submission. I walked the ridgeline. I saw the natural drainage patterns. I saw the southern exposure perfect for passive solar. I saw a shelf of granite that could anchor a cantilevered structure. My father would have looked at this land and seen a money pit. He would have laughed. But standing there, breathing in the cold mountain mist, I realized I didn't need his eyes anymore. I had my own. I emptied my savings. I took out a loan that made my stomach turn. I signed the papers with a shaking hand, alone in a notary's office. No parents. No celebration dinner. Just me and a pen. When I walked out, I didn't own a mansion. I owned a mountain. The real work started the next week. I needed timber milled from the property to clear the site, but I couldn't afford a big commercial crew. I found a local guy named Jared. He pulled up in a truck that was older than I was, covered in sawdust. He looked at the steep grade, then at me. "You want to build where?" I braced myself. This was usually the part where men explained to me why my ideas were cute but impractical. I pulled out my schematics, detailed hydrological studies, load-bearing calculations, sun path diagrams. I laid them out on the hood of his truck. "I don't want to level the grade," I said, pointing to the elevation. "I want to pin the foundation into the granite here and here. We use the timber we clear for the framing. Minimal impact." Jared looked at the plans. He studied them for a long time. Then he looked at me. There was no condescension in his eyes. Just respect. "This is brilliant," he said. "Crazy but brilliant. You're the lead on this." "I'm the architect," I said. "And the owner." "All right then, boss," he said, offering me a hand that felt like sandpaper. "When do we break ground?" That handshake felt heavier than the check my parents wrote Hunter. It wasn't a gift. It was a partnership. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the daughter they settled for. I was the woman calling the shots. I stood on my ridge, looking out over the valley, and realized I had traded an inheritance of money for an inheritance of earth. And the earth didn't care about my brother. It only cared about what I could build. The next 18 months were a blur of concrete, steel, and sawdust. I stopped being just the architect who drew the lines. I became the builder who bled for them. We poured the foundation directly into the granite shelf. It took 3 tries to get the mix right because the mountain air cured the concrete faster than we expected. I didn't mind. Every mistake was a lesson I paid for with my own money, not a handout I had to beg for. Jared and I worked in a rhythm that didn't require words. He taught me how to frame a load-bearing wall without compromising the thermal envelope. I taught him how to angle the photovoltaic array to capture the maximum solar gain during the winter solstice. There was no condescension. "No, let me handle this, honey." Just the quiet, brutal respect of 2 people trying to build something that would outlast them. My hands changed. The calluses grew over the soft skin of a girl who used to wait by the phone. My back ached every morning, a dull throb that felt more honest than any hug my mother had ever given me. The cabin began to rise from the rhododendrons. It wasn't a sprawling mansion like the one Hunter had bought. It was a surgical insertion into the landscape. We used the timber we'd cleared to frame the interior, so the house smelled like the forest it stood in: cedar, wet earth, and rain. We installed floor-to-ceiling triple-pane glass facing the valley. I wanted to see everything coming. I wanted a fortress that looked like a jewel box. While I was installing the rainwater harvesting system, a complex network of filters and cisterns that meant I would never pay a water bill again, the rumors started drifting up the mountain. I hadn't blocked my extended family. I let the information filter in like background noise. My cousin Bethany, who lived for drama, would send me updates disguised as casual check-ins. "Hunter's housewarming party was insane," she texted, attaching a photo of a catered event that looked more like a coronation than a barbecue. There was an ice sculpture. Can you believe it? I looked at the photo. Hunter was standing on a marble staircase, holding a magnum of champagne. He looked flushed, happy, and expensive. But I zoomed in. I saw the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. I saw the way my father was gripping his shoulder, not in pride, but in possession. Look what I bought, that grip said. Look at my investment. Then the whispers changed. 6 months in, Bethany texted again. Heard Hunter is having some cash flow issues. Apparently, the heating bill for that place is $2,000 a month. A few months later, did you hear Mom and Dad had to delay their retirement? Something about helping Hunter with unexpected maintenance costs. I didn't reply. I put my phone down on a stack of reclaimed white oak flooring. I didn't feel glee. I didn't feel pity. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of an audit balancing out. They had invested in appearance. Hunter's house was a stage set, impressive from the front, but expensive to keep the lights on. I was investing in substance. My cabin cost me $120,000 total. Every cent was accounted for. Every nail was driven with purpose. When we finally installed the solar battery bank, I flipped the switch. The lights hummed to life. The meter didn't spin. I was off the grid. I was insulated from their economy, their expectations, and their inevitable crash. I stood in the center of my living room, the glass walls turning the Blue Ridge sunset into a panoramic painting. The air inside didn't smell stale like my parents' house, heavy with obligation and old resentments. It smelled like fresh-cut timber and freedom. I was a ghost to them, a failure who had disappeared into the woods. They thought I was hiding. They had no idea I wasn't hiding. I was fortifying. 2 years later, I logged into my bank account. I stared at the balance of the construction loan. I clicked transfer. The number dropped to 0. I didn't open champagne. I didn't call anyone. I just sat on my deck, listening to the wind move through the hemlocks. I owned the dirt beneath my feet. I owned the roof over my head. I owned the water in the cisterns and the power in the batteries. In an economy designed to keep my generation renting until we died, I was free. I had opted out of the system. My family, on the other hand, was being crushed by it. The information didn't come to me directly. It filtered up the mountain like smoke from a distant fire. A cousin mentioned it at a wedding I didn't attend. An old neighbor posted about it on Facebook. Slowly, the picture assembled itself, pixel by pixel, into a portrait of financial ruin. The legacy house, the $200,000 down payment, the symbol of Hunter's supremacy, was rotting from the inside out. It turned out that in his arrogance, in his rush to secure the status symbol, Hunter had waived the inspection. He'd offered $50,000 over asking price, backed by my parents' retirement fund, and he'd skipped the due diligence because he thought the rules of physics didn't apply to him. He thought money was a shield. It wasn't. The house was built on a fill slope that wasn't properly compacted. The foundation was cracking. Not hairline fractures, but structural failures. The living room was sinking. And behind the fresh drywall in the basement where he planned to put his home theater, black mold was blooming like a cancer. The estimates for repair were astronomical. $100,000 for helical piers to stabilize the foundation. $50,000 for mold remediation. And that was just to stop the bleeding. My parents had liquidated their IRAs. They had refinanced their own home. They were pouring liquid cash into a hole in the ground, trying to prop up a building that wanted to collapse. They weren't funding a legacy anymore. They were funding a disaster. They were trying to buy their way out of a mistake, but the math didn't work. I sat in my fortress of glass and timber, analyzing the data. It was a perfect architectural metaphor. They had prioritized the facade, the curb appeal, the square footage, the address. I had prioritized the foundation. I had drilled into granite. They had built on a lie. I felt a detachment that scared me a little. I didn't want to save them. I didn't want to fix it. I just wanted to maintain the perimeter. But perimeters can be breached. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The air was crisp, signaling the start of autumn. I was outside, stacking firewood for the winter, when I heard the engine. My driveway is a mile-long fire road. It's steep, gravel, and unmarked. Nobody comes up here unless they are lost or invited. I stopped moving. I listened. The engine was straining, a luxury SUV fighting against gravity and loose rock. I walked to the edge of the deck. A black Range Rover crested the hill. It was covered in mud, the tires spinning on the shale. It stopped abruptly in front of my woodshed. The engine cut. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door opened. Hunter stepped out. He looked 10 years older than the last time I saw him. His shirt was wrinkled. His face was pale, sweaty, and desperate. He looked like a man who had been driving for hours, running away from a foreclosure notice he couldn't pay. He looked up at the cabin. I saw the moment it hit him. He wasn't looking at a shack in the woods. He was looking at triple-paned architectural glass reflecting the clouds. He was looking at a seamless metal roof and cedar siding that had silvered perfectly in the mountain air. He was looking at equity. He was looking at confidence. He pulled his phone out of his pocket. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. He didn't look at me. He looked at the house, and then he screamed into the phone. "Dad, you need to see this. You need to come now." I stood on the deck, gripping a piece of firewood, and realized the silence was over. The collapse had arrived at my doorstep. 30 minutes later, a silver Mercedes SUV tore up the driveway, bottoming out on the gravel divots I'd intentionally left unfilled to discourage visitors. My father drove like he was angry at the terrain. My mother sat in the passenger seat, gripping the handle like she was bracing for impact. They parked next to Hunter's mud-spattered Range Rover. The silence of the mountain shattered as doors slammed. I stood on the deck, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee I didn't need. Jared leaned against the doorframe behind me, arms crossed, a silent sentinel in flannel and sawdust. My parents stepped out. They were dressed for a country club lunch. Loafers, pressed chinos, a silk scarf. They looked at the mud on their shoes. Then they looked up. I watched the comprehension hit them like a physical blow. They had come prepared for a rescue mission. They had expected to find their wayward daughter living in a squalid yurt, starving, ready to apologize and beg for a check. They had their speeches ready. They had their pity ready. Instead, they were staring at a masterclass in modern mountain architecture. The late afternoon sun hit the triple-pane glass, turning the facade into a mirror that reflected the forest back at them. The standing seam metal roof gleamed. The cantilevered deck hovered over the valley drop-off, defying gravity. It didn't look like a cabin. It looked like a fortress built by someone who knew exactly what they were worth. "Rhea," my mother whispered. She took a step forward, then stopped, unsure if she was allowed to touch anything. My father, Richard, recovered his composure first. He walked toward the deck, his eyes scanning the structure, looking for a flaw. He looked for a crack, a leak, a code violation, anything he could point to and say, "See? You still need me." "It's small," he said finally, his voice sounding thin in the open air. "And remote. You're 40 minutes from a grocery store. It's hardly practical." I took a sip of coffee. I didn't defend it. I didn't explain the solar efficiency or the rainwater filtration. In that moment, I realized something profound. For 28 years, their authority had been entirely theoretical. It was a currency backed by nothing but the fear that I might need their money someday. Their power existed only in the gap between what I needed and what I had. But I had closed that gap. I had built a bridge over it with my own hands. Standing there on my own deck, debt-free and self-sufficient, I realized they were bankrupt. Not financially, though. Judging by the look of Hunter, that was coming. But relationally. They had nothing to offer me. No leverage. No threat. No reward. They were just two elderly people standing in the mud, critiquing a castle they couldn't afford to buy. "It's not small," Hunter snapped, his voice cracking. He was vibrating with a frantic, manic energy. "Dad, look at the materials. That's cedar. That's architectural glass. Do you know what this cost? Do you know what the equity is on this?" "Hunter, calm down," my mother said, reaching for him. He pulled away. "Calm down? My living room is sinking, Mom. The mold remediation guy said the air quality in my basement is toxic. I can't live there." He turned to me, eyes wild. "You have money," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. "You played poor. You let us think you were struggling in that basement apartment, but you were hoarding cash. You built this. You have to be rich." "I'm not rich," I said calmly. "Don't lie to me," Hunter screamed, pointing a shaking finger at the solar array. "This place looks like a magazine cover. You have money, Rhea. And you're going to help me. You have to. We're family." My father stepped up beside him, regaining his footing now that the conversation had turned to entitlement. "Your brother is in a difficult spot, Rhea. He was defrauded by the inspector. We've tapped our liquidity to help him with the legal fees. If you have resources." "I don't have resources," I cut him off. "I have equity. There's a difference." "It's the same thing," Hunter yelled. "You can take a loan against this place. You can bail me out. I'm going to lose the house, Rhea. I'm going to lose the legacy." I looked at them, the golden child, tarnished and desperate, The parents who had mortgaged their future to buy him a pedestal he couldn't stand on. I didn't build this to bail you out, I said, my voice cold and flat. I built this to keep you out. You have equity. Hunter spat the word like a curse. You can pull cash out. You can save us. Save you. I repeated. I leaned against the railing, feeling the rough grain of the cedar against my back. Hunter, you are drowning in a house you didn't earn. You waived the inspection because you wanted to win the bid. You wanted the status. You wanted the address. I turned to my father. He looked gray. He was doing the math in his head, and the numbers were killing him. You gave him $200,000 just to open the front door, I said, my voice steady. Do you know what this place cost? Total? From the raw dirt to the solar panels. They stared at me. $120,000, I said. Land, materials, permits. Everything. The silence that followed was heavy. It was the sound of a worldview shattering. They had spent nearly double my total budget just on a down payment for a rotting box, while I had built a sanctuary for half the price. That's impossible, my mother whispered. You can't build a house for that. You can, I said. If you don't care what the neighbors think. If you scavenge materials. If you learn to wire a junction box yourself. If you value sweat over status. Rhea, please, my mother's voice cracked. We are losing everything. Your father's retirement is gone. If Hunter defaults, the bank comes after us too. We co-signed. Of course they did. They had bet the farm on the golden child, and now the bill was due. I can't help you, I said. And I wouldn't if I could. You invested in a legacy of appearance. You wanted the McMansion. You wanted the bragging rights at the club. I invested in substance. I invested in survival. You're punishing us, Hunter snarled, stepping toward me. Jared pushed off the doorframe. He didn't say a word. He just took one step forward, placing himself between Hunter and the stairs. Hunter stopped. He looked at Jared, broad-shouldered, calm, capable, and then he looked at his own soft hands. He backed down. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm just not participating. I opted out of this family 3 years ago. You just didn't notice until you needed my wallet. I pointed down the driveway. Go home. Fix your own foundation. I'm busy maintaining mine. They didn't move for a long time. My father looked at the cabin one last time, a look of profound, aching regret. He wasn't missing me. He was missing the asset he had undervalued. Finally, they turned. The car doors slammed. The engines revved. I watched them navigate the turnaround, their tires spinning in the mud, slipping on the steep grade I navigated every day without issue. They disappeared down the fire road, leaving only the smell of exhaust and desperation in the cool mountain air. I stayed on the deck until the sound of their engines faded completely. Jared came up beside me. He handed me a fresh cup of coffee. You okay? Yeah, I said. And I was. I looked out over the ridge. The sun was beginning to set, casting long purple shadows across the valley. I thought about Hunter. His name suited him. He was a hunter. He moved through the world taking things. He took the money, he took the status, he took the credit. He consumed resources until there was nothing left but rot. I was a sower. I had taken raw, difficult earth and planted something in it. I had watered it with sweat and patience. I had waited through the winter. And now I was harvesting the only thing that mattered. Peace. I turned back to the cabin, my glass sanctuary glowing warm in the twilight. It wasn't a house. It was a monument to the girl they forgot to value, and the woman who learned to value herself. I didn't burn their house down. I just built a better one and locked the door. If you've ever had to build your own piece from scratch, share the story. And if you're still building, keep going. The view is worth it.